Unbelievable. It's like you can't even imagine that it would get worse, and yet it does. A recipe in what not to do for corporate America. Don't listen to those ESG crazies, or your stock is going to wind up like Anheuser-Busch, right? Hello, everyone. I am Trish Regan. Welcome to the Trish Regan Show. Portions are brought to you by LegacyPMInvestments.com. You can buy and sell gold and silver right there. Give them a ring, 1-866-589-0560. We're actually going to have Charles Thorngren. He is the CEO of Legacy Precious Metals, our first show sponsor, by the way, coming on in just a little bit to talk about gold. But we're going to talk about Anheuser-Busch. Finally, another Wall Street analyst is waking up to the problem that this fully is, although he's not quite there. You know, they're so afraid of saying what's actually happening. They're so afraid to tell the truth. Nobody actually wants to say, hey, this is probably not a stock you want to buy right now. But if you get into his report, and I'm going to get into it with you, it really tells you exactly what's going on. Meanwhile, there's a distributor in Alabama that's like, I don't think so. Montgomery, Alabama, coming out and telling the local news, we do not condone this. We do not support this. I mean, think about all the distributors all over the country that are caught in this, right? They have a distributorship for Anheuser-Busch, for Bud Light, and now they're on the receiving end of this when they don't morally agree with any of it. The other big question that you got to take into consideration is legally what that company is liable for, what Dylan Mulvaney may be liable for, what TikTok might be liable for. I mean, I just look at it and say, listen, I mean, you look at what the cigarette industry went through. You look at what the vaping industry with the kids flavored cigarette vaping things went through. And you got to ask, wait a second, why are they trying to push this on young kids? What's the idea of having this young transgender on TikTok with an extremely young audience doing an influencing campaign with alcohol? I mean, I wouldn't do an influencer campaign with alcohol. And yet he seemed to have no problem with it, nor did ICM. I believe that's his agency, or I don't know, one of those LA agents. Anyway, beginning here with JP Morgan, maintaining a buy rating. You see, JP Morgan is terrified of actually telling you the truth. But if you're reading between the lines, what you see is the earnings are going to fall off a cliff. The JP Morgan analyst is saying, wow, you know, AB InBev, that's the name of the company, because don't forget, it was a Brazilian company that came out and bought this Anheuser-Busch brand, which was, obviously a very storied brand here in the United States. And it became the multinational company that you now know it to be. Anyway, a guy named Jared Dingus over at JP Morgan, he said he expects earnings before interest and tax in the U.S. to slide 26% this year. That would be on a 12% drop in volume overall, a 10% decline in sales. And I would think so. I would think, by the way, a 26% decline in sales over there at Anheuser-Busch would actually translate into some problems for the stock price, right? Let's just be honest. And if these analysts on Wall Street were honest, instead of trying to curry favor, which is exactly what they do with management so that they can get the inside scoop and then publish these little tidbits, if the analysts were fully being honest, I don't think he'd recommend that you go out and buy the stock just yet. Not if earnings are falling off a cliff, which is what he just told us. Anyway, $58.65 a share. That is where Anheuser-Busch is right now, down 0.3% again today. Just to keep this in mind, I mean, the stock has lost it's like $10 a share, right? From pre-Dylan Mulvaney. And this company in particular has just done absolutely everything positively wrong, right? They were too quiet in the beginning. They didn't say a word for 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden, they get rid of the marketing executives. You remember that woman, I can't ever say her name, but the one who actually told us, oh, well, they're just, a bunch of frat guys and I need to change the brand. I need to mix it up. Well, she mixed it up all right. She and her boss were put on leave. Now, I firmly believe the CEO increasingly now is looking as though his job is in danger. Because one, he waited 2 weeks to address this crisis. Then he let those two people go out on leave. And then he sat down and did this interview in the Financial Times where he said, oh, it's just misinformation. I mean, talking about adding insult to injury. How often have we heard, by the way, We've heard it, right? The whole misinformation thing, which actually turns out to be true. So talking about a bad choice of words to use for your consumers that drink your Bud Light. Well, Bud Light was like a huge seller. It was like their number one. Plus then they had Miller Lite's in its own trouble. We'll get to that. Then they had Mick Ultra. And then they had, what's the other one, guys? I'm going to get to all your comments. Hey, great to see you all, guys. What's the third big beer? Budweiser, right? Budweiser, of course. That's their biggie. And all of this stuff came under fire. All of these sales, like right across the board, Bud Light sort of leading the way. But this company owns a lot of beers, and they are really facing a difficult time. $58.64 a share. Wow. Really amazing. And I'm going to go take a look at TAP right now. TAP would be its competitor, Molson Coors. Molson Coors, do not forget, is so proud of its little commercial there with this woman. Actually, I'd never, ever heard of her. But, I'm not really like into that alternative pop culture. So she's some kind of comedian, Ilana Glazer. So she went out and did this whole thing on how they're so sorry about all those swimsuits at Miller Lite.
Oh. So here's to women, because without us, there would be no beer.
All right. Well, the whole deal of that commercial, and you've probably seen it already. If not, go watch one of my other programs because we've showed it a lot. Anyway, the whole point of that commercial is to say, it's so bad. Like, we can't believe that women were wearing swimsuits to market beer back in 2003. Kind of like in commercials like, do we have it? This one.
Mind if I join in?
All right. So that was one that definitely got a lot of attention. I do believe sold a lot of beer back in 2003 with Pamela Anderson, Sofia Vergara, and some others. So she's saying, we're so sorry about that. And so as a result, we're trying to make it up to women, and we're going to take all those bad commercials and all those bad posters, and we're going to basically turn them into fertilizer. And she uses different words. And so everybody's like, okay, well, now we really know how you feel. We get it. Like, you're woke. You're super, super woke. And so ever since that campaign hit, what do you see? Molson Coors trading down. Shares of TAP are down 0.6% today at $62 a share. So there is some real concern here that this boycott might spread to other beer brands. Hey, maybe it's good. Maybe everybody goes out and supports their local brewers for a change, right? Can you imagine that? Hey, buy local. It's important. It's important. Anyway, this company is really challenged. And I just want to get back to the report for a minute here, because the JP Morgan analyst, while he doesn't actually say what he really thinks, you can read between the lines. And by the way, that's what you have to do with some of these Wall Street analysts, because as I explained, they have their biases and they're trying to be very close to management. And there's a very incestuous relationship there. So the analysts are not really liked if they were to come out and say, hey, the CEO has to go. Well, then the CEO is not going to give this analyst any kind of tidbits about the company. So they're trying to preserve the relationship. They have to be very careful. There was only one analyst that came out. It was like a month after the whole ordeal went down. It was the foreign analyst at Foreign Bank, not necessarily foreign analyst, but Foreign Bank, HSBC, that came out and rated shares of Bud a hold. Wow, the guy looks like a genius. If you were listening to this show, what did I tell you? The stock was going to have a tough time. I'm not giving stock advice, but I'm just being as blunt as I can be. I mean, that was like one you should be able to see a mile away, right? The stock is going to have a hard time because sales are going down and the boycott is not letting up. It's just not. So this one says, okay, sales are down 26%. That's what he is predicting for the year. And there's so many, there's so many options within the beer space. It's not like Nike, which by the way, should actually see some pushback, but has not. And part of the reason may be, one, its demographic is slightly different. And two, it's harder to change shoes. Like, it's pretty easy to trade beers. So the first thing you saw initially was everybody traded into Miller Lite or to Coors Light, both owned by parent company Molson Coors. And well, that didn't work out so well for Molson Coors because it turns out they had made that other little commercial like 3 weeks prior. And so once that came out and I shared it with you guys, what do you know? Shares of Molson Coors under ticker symbol TAP, they traded down. You cannot give this stuff away, certainly on the Bud Light front. And now this analyst over at JP Morgan is predicting that, for the foreseeable future, nobody wants to drink Bud Light. And when we say nobody, we mean like nobody. My words, not his. Nobody, because miraculously, this company has managed to, off everyone. So not just the consumers that traditionally drank it, but the entire LGBTQ plus community as well. That's like, wait a second, why aren't you standing up for us? They had their CEI rating downgraded the other day by the Human Rights Watch that said, okay, well, you're not being nice enough to the LGBTQ population, therefore we have to remove your 100% rating. Well, what does that mean? It means that some of these woke investors out there, which by the way, there are a lot of, in fact, the biggest one of all happens to be BlackRock, which is the king of ESG, environmental social governance. I hope you know what that is, but if you don't, listen up. It is actually this whole system to put in place a series of values that, well, BlackRock thinks every company should have. And so they figure, hey, if government can't get it done, we'll use the capital markets to make sure that we get our policy that we want through. So it's like they're almost more powerful in a way than government. It's a backdoor you see entry into, frankly, communism. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it when you have a group of people that are very close, by the way, to the Democrats and to this administration. When you have a group of people deciding what is something that you should invest in or not, and they're controlling so much money. It's the world's biggest asset manager. Think about that. BlackRock has something like the latest numbers I've seen, and actually maybe their numbers have gone down because some of their green energy things are not quite working out like they thought they would in the market, but they had somewhere around 15 or $14 trillion under management. So that's like a lot of money, right? If you think about the size of US GDP being somewhere around 21 trillion, like BlackRock's a big deal. They're more than half the size of the US economy that they are managing there. So they have a lot of power. They have a lot of influence. They're running every single retirement fund around the country. And so they get to decide where they're going to invest. And if you don't have the right CEI score, the right ESG score, then guess what? They're not going to put money into your company. So the result of all of this is that companies and management teams, instead of being focused on, hey, their customers, their sales, like the normal things that a company should be focused on, in recent years, very recent years, they become kind of obsessed with all this wokeness and all this political correctness. And it's not appropriate. It's not appropriate for a capitalist country to be so sidetracked by all that other stuff. The answer is you're supposed to make money for your shareholders. You have a fiduciary duty to make money for your shareholders. And if you're too focused on remaking America instead of actually selling your products, well, then we got a problem, right? We do, because, at some point people want to retire and they're trusting BlackRock with their money, and BlackRock is an investor. I mean, I'm very curious, would BlackRock say, okay, well, Bud, we're going to give you a cash infusion because we feel for you in this case? I do think that the CEO is going to be in trouble, and I think it's to be expected, which brings me to another company that is suffering from some of this woke nonsense that has led it astray. And that would be my former employer, actually. I wish them very well, but I'm watching their stock today, which actually is trading up about 0.8%. This would be Fox. So they are seeing a little bit of upside after having had what? A series of, you look at the 3-month stock chart, it had been trading up near $34 a share. It's now under $30. So trading at $29.21. And that's a good day for Fox. But look, they've been hit with a lot. They get the $800 million lawsuit that they settled with Dominion. I'm rounding up. It was 700 and something. And then they have another one on the way. And they got rid of their biggest star in a pretty unceremonious way. They just kind of pulled the rug out from under him. I know how it feels. Anyway, viewers don't like it. They just don't like it. And that was their flagship show on their flagship network. So what happens there? I know you guys have a lot of views on this. I know you're not too excited about the idea of Hannity going in at 8 o'clock. I've heard a lot of that from you guys. I'm not surprised. I think that, coming at the news from a different perspective, whether it be, in my case, economic, in Tucker's case, a very social perspective, it's different, and it's more unique, it's special compared to just the pure political perspective, right? Because the pure political perspective, that means you're just kind of, I don't know, part of the RNC. And I do think deep down under, we're all not necessarily just inherently political, but we actually care about the issues. I don't think Donald Trump would have ever gotten elected if people were like, okay, I am just status quo RNC. If that's what you were, then you probably would have gone with whoever the RNC liked and picked. But a lot of Trump's policy issues, they played with, actually, I would say, a lot of longtime Democrats. I mean, what did he do? He lowered taxes in a way that's not necessarily a Democrat thing. Definitely not a Democrat thing. Although JFK cut taxes, did he not? So that's why I said it doesn't have to be political. But anyway, he actually put in policies that resulted in the best growth in our middle class, adjusted for inflation, that we'd ever seen. And then you go over to Joe Biden, and he can blame Donald Trump all he wants, and he can blame March 2020 all he wants. But he doubled down on a bunch of policies that led to insane amounts of spending, thereby inflation, which have resulted in major problems for our economy and our trajectory overall. Right now, we're dealing with this whole debt crisis thing. So that's an example, by the way, of bad management. But back to Fox, which is, in their defense, trading a little bit higher. I am watching the stock very, very closely because if you look at the ratings, which have sunk from 3.2 million at 8 p.m. to some 1.3 million at 8 p.m. On a good night, they're doing 1.5. And I don't know how you recover from that. I think the audience has been burned. I think so many of you came over here. You found me here, which I love. And I so appreciate it. Michael Donald, this is, by the way, I'm just reading your comments. If you're listening live to the Apple podcast, or if you're listening to the Apple podcast, which actually goes up after the live show, I encourage you to come over to the YouTube channel as well, where we are live. And I do read your comments and I take your comments. And Mike's asking me about my coffee cup, which says "Live Free or Die" on it. It has my signature. And yes, it will be for sale actually very soon. I think it is for sale on my Facebook page and on my Instagram page, so you can go check that out. But we'll put that up. It says "Live Free or Die." It's kind of a motto I live by. It's on every license plate in New Hampshire, where I grew up. So it's like, you learn to read when you're like 3 years old and you're looking at the cars in the parking lot, you see "Live Free or Die" and you think, what's that mean? And I think New Hampshire, at least what it used to be, it's changed a little bit because we get all the liberals moving in because zero income tax, zero sales tax. But what I always thought was really unique and really special about the place was that even Democrats were not for any kind of tax hikes. I mean, they understood that you need to keep government on a short leash. And I think that just sort of inherently colors everything that I think, which is why I was not a fan of those lockdowns and the national shutdown back in March 2020. And I thought it was really over the top and ridiculous and came with all kinds of unintended consequences that nobody was willing to even look at the time. You think about Fauci, who didn't have an economist sitting at the table. Fauci, who did not have a mental health expert sitting at the table. Fauci, who did not have an educational expert there. It was just his way or the highway. And somehow, because of all that fear, and Neil Gorsuch, actually Supreme Court Justice, wrote about this. His piece, Justice Statement, came out yesterday. I shared part of that with you about the effect of fear being so severe on a society and how it can go sort of totalitarian. That's my word, not his, but the sort of effect on civil liberties can be massive within just minutes. And that's what we saw. And so that kind of was a crazy time for sure. But what came out of that is that I think, we hopefully are going to be stronger for it. And I do hope that there is more insistence that we need more diversity of viewpoints. And you can't just shut something down, which might actually turn out to be right. Thank you very much. Was I not? I mean, you consider the politics of the situation back then in that moment in time, which were so extreme and so severe. And look, the Democrats got what they wanted. They were able to achieve politically what they wanted. And look, a lot of people suffered. And I'm not saying that you wouldn't take care of the people that need to be taken care of. I have older parents. I want to make sure that they are okay. And look, if you live with older people, maybe you couldn't go into the office every day. I get it. But for those that were young and healthy, we needed to do a better job. And that's my biggest regret for us as a society, not being able to figure out how to protect those that needed protection. Because, by the way, we didn't think about all the people that went into the nursing homes that shouldn't have got in and then infected people. And we needed to simultaneously keep the world going so that you didn't shut everything down in the way that they did. But anyway, that's all sort of water under the bridge. Back to Fox News. So Fox News is in trouble. The stock may be okay today, but you have to look at sort of long-term, where are they going? Where are they heading? First of all, the industry is changing dramatically, if you haven't noticed. And there's new opportunity for independent creators. So in the case of Tucker Carlson, it looks like if he can get out of his deal, he's going to be going over to Twitter and doing a show there. Maybe he'll come here as well. I think a lot of us want to be in a lot of places. I'm looking at Twitter right now myself and saying, okay, can we do live there? Right now you can't, but I think that will change in time. I like live. I like live because I get to see you. I get to talk to you, and I get to see exactly what you're thinking, which is a whole new medium, right? For me, I'm so used to like looking at the camera and just going. And now I get to do more than one thing at once. And I get to hear, oh, Yankee Hill, thank you so much. That's a very sweet say. He said, just very, very nice comments from all of you. I do appreciate it. But when I look at a company like Fox and I think about the position that they were put in, first of all, they never should have been in that position. And by the way, if you are in that position, gosh darn it, why wouldn't you have seen it through? I mean, think about what that means for freedom of speech. Well, I think they couldn't see it through because I think the reality was they had a series of texts and messages from some of their anchors, maybe some of their management, that reflected one thing, and then they went on air and did something else entirely. And so that's where it was really going to come back and bite them in the you-know-what, so to speak. But what that tells you is, where was management? Why was it that anchors were thinking one thing and then saying another thing on air? Because they were so desperate for ratings. I mean, that's when you need sort of the adult to step in. And what I would just say is that, look, networks are supposed to be like that. I've worked at a lot of networks and they're very top down. It's why I actually don't like them because I want to just be able to talk and tell you exactly what I think and I'll deal with the consequences, right? I don't like to have that kind of system around me. But when you do have that system in place, it's kind of like it's like the army. Like everybody needs to like fall in line and everybody needs to do what they are told to do. And if you don't have a strong general who's leading the troops, then your troops are going to go here, there, and everywhere. And the whole thing is kind of going to fall apart, which is exactly what happened at Fox. Meanwhile, when you do have people, myself included, that say something provocative, which, by the way, you knew I was going to say, and then you don't support them, well, think about that. I mean, so they clearly supported enough Tucker Carlson in what he was saying about January 6th and his documentary, et cetera. I mean, they were the ones that were paying for the cameras to go in there and roll tape. And then they suddenly had a change of heart. Like, I don't buy that. It tells me it was weak leadership, which means just like Anheuser-Busch not being able to come out in front and deal with a crisis head on, you get a similar situation there at Fox where you don't have anybody that's minding the store. And so they're allowing the train to leave the station. And then they're like, oh no, what do we do after the fact? And the answer is to get rid of Tucker. I mean, what a shame. Because if you really felt strongly that he shouldn't be there doing the January 6th stuff, then why didn't you speak up? Why didn't you say something? When organizations, big organizations, especially ones with quote unquote talent, where we all got lots of opinions and lots of personality, when they are not run, when they are not managed, you have a power vacuum. And in that power vacuum, you got a lot of people with sharp elbows, and they kind of go further and further and further out on that risk curve. So that risk curve got really steep, and there was no one there to kind of pull them back and rein them in. So if I were the Murdochs, I'd just clean house. I'd be like, hey, you know what? Unless Lachlan wants to do it. I mean, he doesn't strike me as much of a news guy. Sorry. No. So he can't do it. And clearly they are fine just getting rid of people. I'll tell you, talent's not an easy thing to find. Good luck on that one, guys. I know you get the system, right? Like, so to a certain extent, it's like, okay, 8 o'clock is a sweet spot. And The network itself is always going to have a certain kind of built-in viewership. But if you take that for granted, just like Alyssa something did over at Bud Light, I can go fast. Like, let this be a lesson to Fox. You cannot abandon your viewer, but by the way, simultaneously, you can't be totally led by them. You have to have some leadership. And so it's not just appeasing, but it's actually setting the news agenda and talking about the things that your anchors and talent are passionate about that hopefully won't wind up in an $800 million lawsuit with another 2 million coming their billion coming their way with Smartmatic. I think it's going to come down to whether or not Suzanne Scott, who's the CEO, can really convince the Murdochs that she can right this ship. And maybe she needed Tucker gone in order to do that because maybe they were too much at odds. I don't know. I have no inside knowledge on any of that. I would just say there's a power vacuum there. It existed when she was there. Otherwise, I don't think you would have seen all these things unfold. And she really needs to kind of step up to the plate and show everyone who's boss, right? As they say. And that's my advice to her. I'm going to say that because I'm a nice person and a charitable person. And if she wants to keep her job, she's going to have to take charge. Just like if the guy at Anheuser-Busch wants to keep his job, he can't sit there and kind of make fun of all of us and say, oh, it was misinformation. So the stock price is holding up okay there at Fox for now, but we'll see how long that lasts. I think if they're able to pull in new advertisers because they've got a softer style program, maybe that'll work. But for how long? I mean, keep in mind, the advertisers don't like Hannity either. I mean, they don't like anybody that's even slightly right of center, right? I mean, they wouldn't even like me saying this, what I'm saying about, okay, you don't put Dylan Mulvaney in a Bud Light commercial. They think you should, of course. So you have to be cautious in that you do not fall sort of victim to the mob. You do need to lead. And that's what's critical. And if you're always like looking over your shoulder saying, well, are they going to go after me now? Are they going to go after this talent now? Whatever. Then you're not leading. You're not leading because you need to enable all of your talent. Again, I use that word because it's what's used in the industry. You need them to be able to speak freely. You need them to be able to report, but also within the system because you are a system. I'm not a system, right? That's the beauty of being over here, guys. So I love having you. If you haven't subscribed to the live channel, do make sure that you do that. Make sure that you subscribe to the channel. It's important right now because, we're trying. By the way, I've been growing like a weed. I'm thrilled about it because you guys have been sharing the content. Thank you for that. Share it if you would, like on Facebook or Twitter, or wherever you are. Every little bit helps. You have also been so gracious to me in going over to my Apple podcast and you've been rating that 5 stars. Thank you. And I can see all the reviews and stuff. And I just want you to know how much I appreciate it and how much I enjoy this, and the authenticity of it is really pretty extraordinary. So I love having you here. I want to look at, some of the other stuff that's going on in Washington. I'm troubled by the ESG nonsense. I really am. And I think it's going to. Oh, one more thing I just want to say on Fox. So a lot of people are saying, when is Tucker Carlson's show coming out? When is it going to be on Twitter? You remember he went on Twitter recently and he released something saying that he was going to bring his show there. Well, now you're all saying, okay, like when is it actually happening? And it's not clear because there seems to be, from some of the leaked reports and some of the media, I can give you some insight on this because I know what this is to go through to a certain extent from my own experience. But he wants to go do this show in digital media. Now, normally you'd be like, okay, well, that's really no problem. The way the contracts are written, they have the right at Fox to keep you off the air so long as they pay you, right? So in the case of Tucker, he's not technically fired. They parted ways. I mean, they give you a big kick in the pants on the way out the door to try and devalue your brand, but his brand is still pretty strong. So they know that. And they're also, as an organization themselves, going, whoa, like this streaming thing is pretty crazy, right? Because they can't stream. They've got Fox Nation, sort of. I have never watched it. I literally, and I worked there. I've never watched it. And I know that they probably didn't get what they thought they were going to get. I mean, they're pouring money into the thing, but we know some of the challenges because why, what's the expression? Like, why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free? I mean, you can watch Fox News on your cable. So why would you go to watch the Fox Nation streaming thing? I mean, it's a real question. And so they've tried to create differentiating programs, but I think they lost a lot of audience. A lot of people said, okay, well, I'm out of here when Tucker left. Others, I know that many of you told me you cut it when I left. So thank you. But I think that venture is going to continue to run into some headwinds just because they have another product, right? And when you are focused on the main product, it's kind of hard to do this other stuff over here. I mean, that's just the reality of being a big company. If you have one that is actually responsible for making the revenue, then it's natural, right? That you as an organization, you're focused most on that. And this one over here, it's part of the challenge that Facebook is having, which by the way, paid a huge fine. I don't know if you guys saw that, the European fine for the data that they were taking from some of the Europeans. So massive issue over there at Facebook. But Facebook, they in all of these companies, I think, are just going to have to kind of understand this new landscape that we're in. So for Fox, do you actually stream on Fox while simultaneously having the news channel? It's a hard venture. Now, they don't want Tucker. Normally, they wouldn't care. Like I think I'd have to go back and look at the language, but had I just wanted to start my digital show, maybe I could have done that right away. It's not necessarily entirely clear. It's a little bit ambiguous, as I recall, some of the language around it. And so until you fully parted ways, you're probably trying to work all that out. I mean, I think he was making a lot of money. I don't know for sure, but reportedly some $20 million. So that's kind of a hard thing to walk away from. If he's got another year and a half on his contract, you're talking $30 million. So he'd have to have it be worthwhile enough for him to go do a streaming show. But this is what they're facing. So they get the streaming industry that's going to take a chunk out of their business in the future. Kind of like, I mean, think about radio, right? And then TV came. And then you had the big networks, and then cable came. And cable came and this little YouTube thing. I was like, what is that? Like, who would do, like, is that like, kids in their basement? Like, it probably was. It probably is, right? Like Mr. Beast, think about him. That's how he started. He's been on YouTube forever. And he's still really young. So it was sort of like, what is that other thing over there? And it just kind of has taken on a whole life of its own, obviously. And the relationship I think that one can have with all of you is very different than what you would get in the mainstream media. So I think that that's important to keep in mind, and it's going to be one of the challenges that they face overall as a business. Not to say they still can't make money. I mean, look at the evening news programs that I guess people still watch. Like I look at the ratings and they get like 4 or 5 million people. I don't know who watches like the CBS Evening News anymore. I really don't know who, or NBC Evening News or ABC, whatever they call them, World News Today. I mean, nobody's that I know watches that, but they do get numbers. And if they're able to cut their costs enough, they're able to kind of eke out some revenue. And maybe that's the future for some of these cable companies. And I'm not to pick on Fox. I mean, it's actually something throughout the industry going on. They are all looking at having their hands tied because you have these cable agreements that are in place that make it kind of impossible for them to actually stream. And so that's just the reality of the changes. I'm looking at your kind words. Willie and Cordes, good to see you again. Captain, good to see you. Yes, you're right. Like it's pretty tough with Bud Light. And TCC, thank you. He's saying, you're going to be at 100 subs, 100K subs very soon. I mean, I hope so. I think we're onto something here. And we're going to keep it going and we're going to keep it growing because we're coming on an important time with 2024. And we got a bunch of lawmakers that clearly don't know what they're doing. With that in mind, I literally, right before I came on with you, sat down with Charles Thorngren, one of the first sponsors of the show, actually. He runs Legacy Precious Metals. He's the CEO of that company. And we talked a little bit about this entire debt crisis and all the challenges right now. And what the heck do you do, right? And how should you think about gold? So take a listen to Charles, and I'm going to take a look at some of your comments right now. Hey, Charles. Good to see you.
Great to be here. Nice to see you as well.
Charles Thorngren, CEO of Legacy Precious Metals. My first sponsor, by the way, still a sponsor on the show. Always good to check in with you. We're watching gold today. You know, it was kind of soaring there for a while. I've seen some analyst reports that suggest it will continue moving higher through this year into next. I know you don't like to comment on price, so I won't push you on that. But what do you say to somebody who, by the way, asked me the other day, like, why do you invest in gold? Like, why do you like it?
Great question. And it's not whether we like gold or not. Mm-hmm. It's really the economy dictates that we should like gold.
And
when you
because
you have an economy now that, and we've had one for years, right? That is absolutely based on deficit and overspend. And this is what gold is meant to protect against. It protects your dollar. It protects your purchasing power, but it protects the overreach of government and the overspend of government. This is why gold is so important because, and this is not just one party here. We're talking politics in general. It's about overspending. It's about expanding budgets, spending more than we need. This is what gold is meant to protect against. This is why when you look at gold, 20 years ago, it was $600 an ounce. And today we're sitting just below $2,000 an ounce.
So in other words, the thinking being that this is one of the vehicles ideally that keeps up with inflation. Hopefully you beat inflation a little bit, but if nothing else, the hope is, or the expectation is, that you will at least keep the value of something, because we all know we're not keeping the value of our dollars. Thank you very much.
No, and that's exactly right. This is about purchasing power. It's not about the dollar per se. It's about what the dollar does for you.
Okay, so we're looking at a mess, right? We're looking at a mess right now on Capitol Hill as we see all of this unfold, and there's all this posturing and the debt ceiling. And look, we go through this a lot. I think this time it's a little bit different just because it's more politically volatile, shall we say. But where does gold come in all of that? I mean, do you say, okay, if I own gold, maybe I don't need to worry as much about some of the other shenanigans that are going on? I mean, of course, you're going to worry, but nonetheless, that's your hedge in some way, shape, or form?
That gold is what makes you say, I'm worried about this, but it's not going to affect me as bad as it does the rest of America. Mm. That's where gold comes in, right? We do need to worry about how our government spends. Ultimately, our government's supposed to work for us, ultimately. But we need to protect ourselves financially because that's our responsibility. And for those of us who think that the government is overreaching, we owe ourselves the ability to take care of ourselves. We can't make that statement and then leave our retirement, our livelihood in the hands of government when we have options to take care of ourselves.
No, I agree with you. I mean, it's part of sort of my overall theme that I occasionally wade into, but you always remind me of that. I mean, just self-reliance, right? Independence, freedom. A lot of that comes from having the financial stability to do that. And I'm not a financial advisor, but I do, at least on one level, think it's really, really important for people to be thinking creatively about how they protect themselves for their future. Part of that means, hey, living within your means. Something that's apparently not so easy to do when you look at credit card debt in America. Part of that means having an investment strategy that's sound, that makes sense so that you can sleep at night. And you shouldn't ever, be relying on government. I think, a lot of us, sure, we're putting money into Social Security, but we know that's one big Ponzi scheme that may not be there for us one day. So you've got to look out for yourself, numero uno. And that's part of what we need to do as good citizens. So I know you see gold as part of that portfolio. Any thoughts on? I mean, I have my view on it, but any thoughts on like a percentage of the portfolio, or is that too difficult? I mean, by the way, we should at least mention that people can give you guys a call. I know you get a great sales team there, and they can call you at 1-866-589-0560. You can also go to legacypminvestments.com, sponsor this program. You can go to the website. You can buy and sell gold right there online, and silver. I don't want to leave silver out, Charles. We got to get to silver, but you can do all of this there. And I know that also the salespeople, they're very good, and they can help walk you through some of this. So if you have questions, certainly reach out to them. But Charles, with all this in mind, does it just depend on the person and depend on the situation, whether you have 1%, 5%, what more? It may depend on your chances of retiring in the near future versus 20 years from now.
It's really dependent on each individual. And that's why it's important to talk to somebody, right? We want to establish what you need to accomplish. And that's hard to do sometimes. It's hard to do by yourself sometime, right? So you talk it through, and it depends on what your parameters are. You look at people,
And everybody does have different parameters. So again, that was Charles Thorngren, who just joined me moments before we came on. And I want to encourage you to continue stay on this channel, because the entire interview, there's a good sort of 12 minutes or so with Charles Thorngren from Legacy Precious Metals, one of our show sponsors. And we're talking about the price of gold there. So it's kind of interesting. He likes the volatility in this market because he thinks it offers more opportunity for people that are in this space. Gold right now trading at $1,974 an ounce as we come up on this debt ceiling disaster, right? Like, just, my gosh. I mean, like, how did it get this bad? Really? How did it get this bad? I have some theories. And I think that there's a real jockeying for control. And this is sort of a terrifying time from that perspective. And Neil Gorsuch said it so well, Supreme Court Justice, when he came out with the statement saying that, we just kind of went crazy because we were so fearful. And fear is a very powerful emotion. And if you can't cut through that fear, you make poor choices. We made poor choices as a country. We made poor choices in terms of shutting down our economy at a time when we never, ever should have done that. I mean, it's just wild to think about. And the consequences of that have been so significant and so severe. And so as a result of all that fear, we're still reeling from it, right? We're still sort of very fragile. And what we need to take away from that is that we can't allow it again. I mean, I think about it in terms of investing, and I've seen a lot, right? I think about the tech bubble. I think about 2008, which was really scary. You think about 2000 in March 2020. And I think that was one period where I could really sort of say, okay, with some clarity, you know that the Fed is going to be there because they can't help it, right? Like any excuse to print money, they'll be there. And I knew that Donald Trump was like, okay, we need stimulus checks. So even though we were shutting down the economy, I looked at that, I think, with a pretty clear lens and said, okay, this is ridiculous. We shouldn't be selling off this market. In my own personal portfolio, I actually bought stocks at that time, which turned out to be a very good decision, only because it was so insane. It was just like, this can't. Now, I'm still cautious about our fundamentals. And I think I was very clear when I came out in August of 2020. And I said, look, we're going to have serious inflation. We're going to have inflation. This was after Trump did his second stimulus check, because you can't have this much stimulus, this much from the Federal Reserve, and not pay some kind of consequence. And what did Biden do? He added a third stimulus check and 2 more rounds of giant stimulus spending from Congress. And the Fed kept at it. And I was like, whoa, guys, like, you are going to suffer. And sure enough, you had double digits in the PPI, the Producer Price Index. You had nearly 10% in consumer prices rising, and still we're dealing with 4.9% of an increase over last year. Like, this inflation is still there. I'm sorry. It's not going away, despite what you're trying to spin, Joe Biden. And it is a direct result of a series of very poor choices on the policy front. And you need to be able to kind of, I think, see that clearly and be able to cut through all the you-know-what out there. The analysts that want to tell you a month after the fact that maybe Bud Light is going to be a problem, you think, for Anheuser-Busch. I'm sorry. Like, some of this stuff is just pretty obvious. If you're not willing to say it, then why should I be trusting you with my money? JP Morgan. Anyway, good to see all you guys. I love having you here. Let's talk again tomorrow around same time, same place. Make sure you subscribe. And if you're on other social platforms, I know one of you told me, I think Willie, that you're not on other social platforms. But if you are, I usually send out a note or a tweet or a Facebook message just so you know that I'm going to be here. We'll streamline it soon. Maybe if you sign up for my email, which is at trishreganshow.com. You just have to wait for like a minute or so and a little pop-up will come up and you can sign up for my email, and we're going to streamline that so at least we can email you and say, hey, we're over here, and so the show is happening. But typically around 12:30 we're live. I love seeing you, Douglas. Great to have you here. Lee, yeah, by the way, I did a whole thing on that the other day. Lee is writing that inflation is way higher than government reports. I totally agree. And some of that has to do with some of the changes in metrics that they made back in the 80s. And so, John, it is wonderful to see you as well. Really, really, really good stuff. One viewer asking, who cares that Biden doesn't understand economics? I will just say this. It is so critical. It's one of the foundations that you need to have. If you're going to be a world leader, you need to understand, one, how to negotiate deals so that you're not like digging in your heels from the very beginning saying, I'm not going to do a darn thing to lower spending. I'm just going to, sit here like a spoiled child and say that I'm only going to take a clean debt ceiling. That's number one. Number two, you need to understand how markets work so that you have some appreciation for what's going to happen when you flood the system with so much cash, as you did Joe Biden, as you did Jerome Powell. He understands, by the way, so he's more at fault. Jerome Powell, what were you thinking? Janet Yellen, what were you thinking? They're thinking politics, unfortunately. And I would just like to see more responsibility from our leaders, less of a political move, more of what is good for the country as a whole going forward. I'll leave you on that note. Again, great to see you. As always, do make sure that you have gone over and followed. It's called Follow now on Apple Podcasts. There's 3 little dots on the upper right-hand side. Go follow the podcast there. Leave a review if you could. 5 stars. I always appreciate it. And I'll see you back here tomorrow, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.